Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are stepping right into the biting, freezing, and incredibly sensory reality of a medieval winter. We really need to toss out that modern assumption that our ancestors just sat around in the dark, shivering helplessly, waiting for spring. Instead, we're going to look at historical survival through a totally different lens: thermophysical engineering, architecture, and sheer human resilience. Now, you might be wondering, without the luxury of central heating, how did they do it? They faced a brutal, unforgiving environment where winter meant a very real, constant threat of disease and death. To survive, they basically had to become masterful engineers of microclimates. They utilized these nested systems of climate control to stay alive. So they weren't just building homes, they were literally building survival engines. And every single architectural choice carried a life or death consequence. You couldn't just blast raw energy into a drafty stone box and hope for the best. Instead, they engineered dynamic, concentric layers of defense against the freezing cold, managing heat retention and mitigating drafts with absolute precision. They treated their structures as living, breathing, thermodynamic systems. Section 1. The Physics of Stone. Okay, to understand this outermost circle of survival, we first have to appreciate the sheer labor and material constraints required to erect these massive defenses. We're talking walls ranging from 3 to over 9 feet thick, and that was absolutely essential because stone possesses massive thermal mass. During the day, it absorbs ambient heat, and then as the temperature drops, it gradually releases that stored energy. That delayed transition is what we call thermal lag. So a thick stone wall acted as a dense, regulating barrier against the night's chill, maintaining a remarkably consistent internal temperature. However, this system definitely had a deadly flaw. Stone is naturally porous. When moisture fills those microscopic pores through capillary action, say soaking up groundwater or heavy winter rain, a wet wall rapidly drafts heat right out of the interior. Because water conducts heat approximately 25 times faster than still air, a saturated castle resulted in this bone-chilling dampness. It literally transformed a fortress into an exceptionally cold, miserable environment. But medieval builders didn't just accept that. They countered it with active defenses. Utilizing impervious slate layers and porous clay pipes called capnon tubes, they actively prevented the upward migration of freezing ground moisture. Actually, if we look at historical records from 1260, King Henry III ordered the suspended wooden floors at Havering Castle to be covered in thick, beaten earth. This was specifically to replicate the draft-excluding properties of solid ground and halt that creeping frost. Section 2. Passive radiant barriers. Moving inward from those massive walls, we step into the Great Hall to examine the passive barriers designed to isolate human warmth. Now, we often view heavy, woven tapestries purely as decorative artwork, right? Well, in reality, they were critical layers of thermal insulation. By hanging a few inches away from the cold masonry, they created a static air gap, which broke the conductive link between a person's warm body and the freezing wall. Freezing to death was very often a symptom of poverty. Exposed stone in a medieval chamber was actually viewed as a lethal indicator of a lord's failing wealth. And beneath their feet lay a stark divide in both social class and survival. The peasantry had to rely on cheap, loose rushes just strewn across beaten earthen floors, which presented incredibly high fire and entanglement risks. But if you look at the aristocratic chambers, the wealthy utilized elaborate, tightly plaited rush mats, like those woven in the East Anglian style, which prevented both slipping and those really dangerous fire hazards. Try for a second to imagine the sensory reality of walking into one of these rooms. You could almost smell the fresh cucumber-like scent of the slightly dampened rushes. Households intentionally kept them lightly moist to maintain their suppleness and to prevent flying fireplace sparks from igniting the entire floor. Layered about 6 inches deep, these rushes provided a springy, heavily insulated surface that completely isolated feet from the freezing ground below. Now, before the 17th century, window glass was an incredibly rare luxury. So to seal their windows against the biting wind, medieval engineers deployed a resourceful and honestly kind of bizarre array of translucent biological materials. They soaked animal horns in water for up to 3 months until they could be peeled into thin, transparent sheets. They also used oiled parchment, animal bladders, amniotic sacs, and loosely woven linen screens just to allow light in while keeping that brutal winter out. Paired with these translucent screens were heavy, solid wooden shutters. The wood would naturally expand under humid winter conditions, creating a remarkably tight, wind-proof seal right in the window jamb. When combined with aerodynamic window designs that physically deflected the cold air, they effectively turned the stone chamber into a sealed thermal vault, trapping whatever ambient heat could be generated inside.
Section 3. Active convective systems. Having successfully penetrated the castle's passive defenses, we arrive at the absolute heart of the home. Heating technology constantly evolved alongside human civilization. As you can see, it stretches all the way from the ancient central hearths of Neolithic Stonehenge 4,500 years ago to the incredibly labor-intensive Roman hypocaust underfloor heating systems. It then moves to the massive ornate Tudor chimneys built as status symbols all the way up to the 1930s, where Eltham Palace featured electric underfloor heating that was so luxurious, even the owner's pet lemur had a centrally heated room.
In the medieval period, however, survival dictated a reliance on sheer monumental scale. Enormous central hearths served double duty as both the primary heating system and the kitchen. These stone beasts dominated entire walls. They were reaching 8 feet wide and were tall enough for a grown man to stand completely inside, literally capable of roasting an entire ox. And the efficiency of this engineering is absolutely striking. 3.5 hours. A single intense 3.5 hour burn in one of these massive hearths could heat a monumental hall for nearly a week. Thanks to the sheer thermal mass of the stone surrounds we talked about earlier, the heat was captured and then slowly, consistently radiated back into the room long after the flames had actually died down. Section 4. The microclimate of bodies. We now look at the final, most intimate concentric circle of survival. Imagine the stifling air, the smell of damp wool, wood smoke, and livestock all mixed together. Instead of trying to inefficiently heat dozens of separate rooms across a massive, drafty castle, 50 to several hundred people would gather in one enormous space. They literally used the collective radiating warmth of their own bodies, alongside working animals, as a biological furnace to push back the winter chill. Because of this, our modern insistence on nocturnal privacy was a luxury they simply could not afford. Nighttime necessitated a communal huddle. Important guests, knights, and attendants slept shoulder to shoulder in the exact same quarters as the lord and lady. Knights occupied hall benches, servants curled up on straw pallets on the floor, and personal attendants slept on pull-out trundle beds right next to the nobility. And right at the center of this human huddle was the noble four-poster bed, which was fundamentally a room within a room. Draped with heavy canopies, side curtains, layered with feather mattresses and thick fur coverings, it was expertly designed to trap body warmth. The stark juxtaposition here is undeniable. You have this highly insulated, deeply intimate microclimate for the feather-bound lord, while just a few feet away, servants shivered in rough wool on the cold floor below. Section 5. A living thermodynamic system. So let's take a step back and really observe how all these concentric layers operated together. Medieval builders and the people living there treated a draft not as a minor annoyance, but as a critical structural vulnerability that could literally mean the difference between life and death. By orchestrating massive thermal stone, passive textile insulation, strategic central hearths, and the communal warmth of human body heat, they engineered a masterful, multi-layered defense. We leave this explainer with a profound respect for the everyday ingenuity of our ancestors. They definitely weren't just shivering victims of a dark, miserable past. They were brilliant architects of survival who understood their environment intimately. So the next time you adjust your digital thermostat without a second thought, ask yourself, if the grid failed tomorrow, would you possess the thermophysical ingenuity to build a microclimate and survive the winter?